The goal of a producer on a show like Drag Race should always be, one, to make sure that their job is completed by pushing the people that they need to push to the end, but two, to make sure that we as the audience don't see the strings being pulled. And I think most people will agree that Season 10 of All Stars has really been one of those seasons where they were not covert about their hands being on the wheels or pulling the levers or pulling strings in order to make things happen. So the goal of today's video is going to be a spicy one. We are going to reformat the entire casting of this season of All Stars, and the goal will be to make sure that the pushes still get pushed while being a little more covert about it. See, I think one of the biggest problems of this season is that they took a lot of early outs and then stacked them against some super giants. And I think the intention of that is for us as the audience to see, well, this person went home early for a reason. This person was clearly stronger because they just had the experience. Even more insidious than that, they stack power players with early outs in challenges that are clearly built for the power players. Someone like Ginger was always going to do better in a Country Divas challenge over someone like Alyssa Hunter, who has an English barrier and is not a country diva. Someone like Mistress is always going to win in a diss track over someone like Nicole Paige Brooks, even if she is from Atlanta, Georgia. I think there were some surprise breakout stars like Aja in particular in the first segment, and Irene, who circumvented most people's expectations of her. But anyway, I'm talking too much. I want to play the role of the producer in this video, and I want to pull the strings that they clearly wanted to pull without making it look so overt. So let's get into this. We've got each one of our brackets, and I've laid out all the contestants as they showed up in the season, as well as the challenges that they all faced. What I want to do is try and figure out who's got the best synergy with the challenge in particular. See, what I think would happen in a season where they're still pushing someone, but maybe trying to give the illusion that it's fair, is put queens in a category that makes sense for them that they could do well in. So someone like Ginger being in a country challenge with other country divas like Phoenix and Nicole. So then it makes a little more sense why the group all got that, but they can still push Ginger through to the win. Maybe even someone surprises us. Maybe they almost break top 2 and it's a odd rats moment rather than, well, that was clearly set up. Because again, the goal of the producer is to not let us notice that it's set up. So let's start with the orange bracket. We have the Roomix Rock Challenge, where the parameters were to just be in a rock group. And then we had our runway tits and slits, which I think was very clearly set up for Bosco to excel in. We've got the Murder on the Dance Floor Improv Challenge, where they got self-assigned characters. They had to work with RuPaul, so that is a huge parameter of this assignment. Not only do you have to be able to be funny and improv well, you've got to have a good rapport with Ru. That's critical for this challenge. And then the runway being coming and going, which I'm neither here nor there about. And I'm only including the runways because maybe that will factor in who I would want to see in that challenge. And then the final challenge of Orange Bracket was the makeover / girl groups. This is a hybrid challenge, which every bracket has. It is a branding challenge, first and foremost. I will stick tried and true that makeovers are always about branding, taking who you are and putting it on someone else. So we want to find people who have a really strong identity and sense of self, but also people that will be able to draw out a character from these sporty girls. And then the last part of this challenge is to record a verse and perform it. So it's part branding, also part performance. Runway being family resemblance. So let's start with the room mix, where the queens that I think would work the best here, Bosco, for obvious reasons. She is a rocker girl. That has always been her essence, I think. Aja's got that vibe on lock. Irene makes total sense for this challenge. Lydia has that rocker energy. Same with Tina. Alyssa literally played guitar during her talent show in season 14. And then I think Daya's got the right energy for this kind of challenge too. So these are all who I think would fit in well here. And at the end of this project, we're going to whittle them down and see who has the best synergy, one as a group, but also with the overall challenge selection. Episode 2 is the improv challenge, Murder on the Dance Floor. I think the queens who make the most sense here are the ones with the most inherent ability to improv well. That's Bosco. Irene, I think we saw so much offline of her and how quick-witted she is. It makes sense that she would be in something like this and that she could do well. Obviously, we have the recency bias that she did do well, but throwing that aside, this seems like something that in her wheelhouse. Deja was good at improv in her season. That was one of her strongest points. Mistress is an incredible improver. I think that Acid Betty works with the overall theme of a murder mystery. And then of course, Ginger Minge is the improv queen. I feel like she is the one to stick into any challenge where improv is involved. And specifically for the runway category of coming and going, I would love to see Carrie and Denali. I found that most of the middle challenges are ones where I would have wanted to have seen other people in that runway category, which I think is fascinating. And then for challenge 3 of Orange Bracket, the ones who I think make most sense with this hybrid challenge, Irene, she has a really strong branding. I think Lydia's got a really strong brand. Tina has a lot to make up for and a redemption, so to speak, because her makeover in 13 was abysmal. I think that Mistress has a lot to make up for from her makeover challenge as well. Acid Betty's got such a clear brand. Denali's got a very clear brand, and much like Tina has a little bit of a redemption to get. Cynthia never got to do a makeover challenge, but I feel like she has a strong visual brand and a strong character presence. And I think something about her feels sporty in some way. I can't explain what that is, but Cynthia feels sporty in nature. So I feel like she would be fun for this challenge. She's got high energy. I think she'd be able to draw something out of these girls. So let's move into Pink Bracket now. We have starting out the 8-ball design challenge. It was random self-chosen materials, and then they had to present that on the runway. So who is going to be able to just take any random thing and make it into a garment that makes sense for them? It is part branding, it is part design, it is unconventional. Very different from the other design challenge we had this season. Then we have the hybrid challenge of this group, which is the roast roomix. They're not only recording a rap, but they are also roasting the hell out of each other. Or that was the idea, that was the assignment, that was the brief that most of them got, some of them didn't. So we're looking for people with quick wit, sharp tongues. And then it's obviously a lip sync performance as well. So we've got a lot of categories happening in this challenge. It is the most complex of this one. And then the runway's Little Shop of Horrors, which in my opinion makes so much more sense for the Rusical. I would have swapped Little Shop of Horrors with Rusical because Little Shop's a musical. Does that not make sense to anybody else? So for that Rusical challenge, it is really more of a girl group than anything. I don't know if I would gaslight myself into saying, that's a Rusical, but the show says it, so it is what it is. And the runway category is Wild Wild West, which I still would have put into the Hoedown Throwdown challenge of Bracket Purple, but that's another story for another day. Starting with the first challenge, I think the people who would be the best at design are Bosco. We saw her do some incredible work with that tarp jumper that she made in 14. I think that Irene has really strong branding and would know what to do with random materials. We have Georges, who did really well in her design challenge, and I think obviously we saw her do fairly well this episode as well. Lydia has a great design sense and has a great idea of what works for her, color choices and all that. Maybe the execution's not always perfect, but she can work with unconventional materials, and we saw that in this episode as well. Mistress is someone who knows how to design for her body very well. Tina, very clearly, was the one in this challenge. Acid is someone who I think really can go for it, and with a bunch of random materials would make something interesting. And I think Daya's got a pretty strong sense of design and tailoring for her own body. For challenge 2, I think the smartest people in this entire bracket, the ones with the quickest wit, the sharpest tongue, are Bosco. She can roast and read like it's no one's business. Aja is very quick-witted and sharp, even if sometimes she takes a little moment to get there. I would have loved to have seen a twist on the "you're beautiful, you're perfect, you look like Linda Evangelista, you're a model." I think that would have been interesting to see what she would have done by aggressively complimenting everyone in the cast. Georges, this is in her wheelhouse. Lydia won her roast. This is in her wheelhouse. Mistress, all of the above. I think Denali is very sharp and very quick-witted. She would work well here. Ginger makes sense. She can also roast like it's no one's business. And then for the runway in particular, I would want to see Carrie, even though I don't think that she did very well in this challenge. I still like her for this concept of runway. And then for the Rusical challenge, we're looking for queens who are really good at that. And I think that Deja has something to make up for, a redemption, so to speak. Olivia is a musical girly. She can sing. She makes sense for this. Lydia makes sense. She did great as that flying monkey in season 17. Tina did great in her Rusical, and the judges responded to her very positively. I think that Daya did quite well in her Rusical and has a lot to make up for as well. Denali is someone who really had high expectations for Rusicals in her season, and I think would need a little redemption as well. And then Ginger's one of those girlies who I think is just like the hammer on the nails for Rusicals. Her performance in Glamazonian Airways and in the Bad as Bitches in Herstory live in my head rent-free. I think she's one of those really strong contenders in a Rusical. So these queens are who I would want to see for these particular challenges and who I think would do well in them. So then we go to the purple bracket, the last one, where our very first challenge is the hybrid challenge. This one is part character creation, part storytelling, part comedy, and design is on the very, very, very back burner. The back Tina burner. So we are looking for people who have strong storyline of either being a really good person in the workroom or a really chaotic presence. So I'm thinking of those who have the storyline already behind them, which is why someone like Cynthia and Acid makes so much sense on paper in this challenge. But then we throw in the storytelling element. They've got the background to create this, but can either one of them create a cohesive story to sell it? That's where Ginger excelled more than the rest, because she's got a strong identity and sense of self, and she can translate that well on Drag Race. Not a lot of queens can do that. So this bracket was kind of stacked in her favor because everyone else in the room wasn't really good at doing that. Even Daya, who was her partner, was not able to keep up in the storytelling aspect. She sold it in presentation, but didn't really have the chops to create that story. So this really was in Ginger's favor, and I think others in this group probably could have been able to keep up with her. We've got the girl group challenge, the Promsters Country. Girl groups, like every other bracket has had, is part performance, Night of 1,000 Mileys, which I still think was a little bit of a throwaway. And then we've got the Golden Bitchler Improv Challenge, where the background is improv, it is part comedy, it is working in groups once again. It is also a duo challenge. So let's get into the challenges. So we're looking for queens who have solid storyline behind them and can pitch a story. I think that Aja has a Drag Race quasi-villain arc that's already sitting behind her with that storyline with Valentina all those years ago. This is something she could play off of, the Princess Disaster. There's a lot that I think is riding behind her that she could draw from. I think Irene, being someone whose POV is being an alien, that would be really interesting to see how that would translate through witchiness. Olivia is someone who played a good girl on her season, and I think that storyline is very strong and would translate well into this challenge. Phoenix is someone who didn't have a lot of storyline very early, but had her iconic prison honey moment with India Farah. So that's something she could pull from and have a lot of jokes and comedy based off of behind that. I think Lydia is someone who's got really great storytelling and has a very cool visual aesthetic. Mistress is someone who played a villain and continues to play a villain all the time. That is great for this exact challenge, for being a bad witch. Cynthia is someone who played a really good character in all of her seasons of Drag Race. Daya is someone who played a villain. Ginger is someone who has gone back and forth between the villain and hero roles. She is perfect for this, plus her connection with Wizard of Oz in general is exactly what this challenge calls for, if not a little bit of a stunt. For the girl groups challenge, the prompt is country, so we want to try and draw country divas out. While I don't necessarily think that Irene is a country diva, I think that she is a jack of all trades and can do literally just about anything. So I would love to see her in this challenge. Phoenix is obviously a country diva. It makes sense that her energy would be in this challenge. Mistress is a southern diva. Same with Carrie and Nicole. They make sense here because they've got the background in order to translate into what this character would be. Now, I would remove Night of 1,000 Mileys from the equation and swap that out with Wild Wild West, personally, and I think that this group would be really strong in this challenge, and obviously I think this challenge was made for her. And I think for a Night of 1,000 Mileys, I would specifically want to see what Georges did in something like that, just tossing that into the hat. And then for the improv challenge, it is duos, it is Bitchler all over again, looking for people who are good with improv. That's gonna be Irene. Olivia was really great as that mime in 13. Lydia, I think, had some really great opportunities in 17 to improv and was hit and miss. Mistress is very good with improv. Nicole has been playing this horny MILF character on Drag Race, so I think something like this makes sense for her. And then Ginger being the improv girly, wanting to see her in anything improv related, this challenge also makes sense for her. These are all the queens that I think make sense in each one of these challenges. So now that we've kind of created this conspiracy theory board of who would potentially do well in these kind of challenges and their energy makes sense for them, let's do a complete redesign of the season. We want to restructure everything so that the season has a slightly better flow. I think, for me personally, something that I missed from this entire bracket was roasting and reading each other as the intro for each one of the groups. So the roast remix would be episode 1. And the way that I'm reformatting this is going to inform who is going to go in which bracket. Episode 2, I think, actually makes complete and total sense to have it be Murder on the Dance Floor. A early improv challenge makes sense for Drag Race and the structure it usually goes for. It is a volley with Rue, so it allows her, while she still has the energy at the top of the season, to play with these queens and doesn't make her have to go and play with them and expend energy and maybe the fatigue part of the show, where maybe she just wants to be out of there and clock in and clock out. Catch her while she's still excited, you know? And then episode 3, I think what makes the most sense would be the character design challenge. And this is just a personal preference. I think that the girl group was way too early. I, in particular, respond more to the girl groups being in the later part of the season, and I felt that this was a weird placement when this episode dropped, so I would swap character design into this one, so it would be Wizard of Oz to end cap this bracket. Then we move to pink bracket, where I think the most logical opening ceremony would be the country girl groups. Set it off on a high note, set it off on performance, so that we just have this energy bar set. Since everything kind of slowed down with the design challenge the week before, let's get us back into a good rhythm. Episode 5 would then be the 8-ball design challenge, and then it also prevents design and branding challenges from being too close to each other. And then episode 6, I think, makes the most sense to retain as that quote-unquote rusical, because this bracket is more performance heavy. So then pink bracket is not design, performance. So it separates the two performance challenges from each other by keeping something in the middle of them, and then keeps the design challenges from being back-to-back as well. Moving into purple bracket, I think what makes the most sense for episode 7 is the rock remix. I think, again, it sets a good pacing for what this particular bracket is going to deliver. It gets the energy up after potentially maybe seeing a little stunt in the previous week, and it gets the energy high for this last leg of this competition, this last nasty old leg. And then episode 8, I think, makes the most sense to have be Bachelor. And then the final challenge would be the makeovers, because I think, again, makeovers make the most sense when you structure them near the very end of the season. I think that's what a lot of us have become accustomed to. Makeovers at the top, even if it was just 6 of them, is sort of a weird energy because we're still kind of getting our feet into the water of the season, and then we immediately introduce external characters. And so I would just rather see this at the very end of the season. So, based off of who I previously assigned into these brackets, here's who falls where. As you can see, some of these queens are present in a lot of challenges because I genuinely think that they would do well in all of them. And as you can see, a lot of these pairings are quite dynamic. So now the challenge is going to be whittling all of this down to make a cohesive lineup of queens. What I think makes a cohesive all-stars is personality types that blend well together, characters who make sense in the challenges, and your TV presence. But we also have to factor in that they have people that they want to push to the end. I would only assume, based off what we've seen, that those pushes would be Bosco, Ginger, Mistress, and Georges. Everyone else, from what this season has shown, are sort of tertiary characters, and I think most people would agree that the general All-Stars format, there are a couple queens that they're looking at, and there are others that are not on the vision board at all. So we want to try and make the cohesiveness as fine-tuned as possible, and not make it seem so overt that some people are getting pushed over others and have others just be dominoes so that someone can win. So we're going to start removing all the commonalities. So I'm going to solidly suggest that Bosco be in the introductory group. She's got great energy. It is a fantastic setup for the entire season if Bosco is here. Plus, she is a regular in the Vegas show. She's kind of fresh in people's minds. Having her be one of the first faces that people see, I think is going to be good branding Drag Race wise. Then we want to remove Irene from any of the other brackets. I think that she makes most sense at the very end of the season. She's someone that a lot of people have been waiting for. I think the edging of that excitement would create some thrill for the end of this bracket, and we need that last group to have us not be burned out on the season. We need this last group to get people excited for leg 2, and I think Irene would be able to do that. Then we need to remove Ginger from any of the other brackets that she doesn't really make sense in. Ginger makes the most sense, one, in the Country Girl Group Challenge, but she also makes sense in the Character Design Challenge because that is hers. She makes sense doing any of the improvs, so she doesn't necessarily need to be in Bachelor. And because Ginger's one of the most sharp-witted girls in this entire cast, I think that she makes the most sense in the Roast Room Mix. Maybe she wouldn't be the best at rapping, but I do think that she would have the best energy for this kind of challenge, and I think it would set up good energy with her being with Bosco, who is also very smart and quick-witted. Now we need to remove Mistress from other brackets. I think that Mistress makes the most sense starting out the season. With her being this chaotic goblin, I think having her be the sort of negative light among a lot of these other queens who would be less of that in the intro sets off a easy pacing for the rest of the brackets to follow, because as an audience, we'll always think, oh, well, at least they're not as villainous as Mistress. Again, production's goal should be to hide what strings they're pulling, and because Mistress was clearly meant to go to the end, I think having her be paired up with someone like Ginger makes the most sense to me, because if the two of them get pushed through, the two favorites already got tackled at the beginning, they're already locked in for the finale. Now we get to just enjoy the season. Now we need to remove Aja from all the other brackets that I had her in. I think she makes the most sense paired up at the beginning. Aja, much like I think Irene, is someone that a lot of people have wanted to see. Her energy would be good with Bosco, two powerful trans women with very different stories to tell, but very important ones to tell, especially in this time and place that we're in right now. Now we need to remove Olivia from other brackets. I think that there's a lot of places that Olivia could fall. Olivia, unfortunately, is one of those queens that I think none of these particular categories were in her wheelhouse. And then we need to remove Georges from the brackets that she doesn't make sense in. I think she makes most sense in pink. Have her right in the middle. She is someone who just got off of a season, so seeing her again, it creates a little bit of fatigue in the same way that people are fatigued by seeing Ginger. But I think where Ginger has a couple years off of the show, Georges just got off. So she makes most sense for the middle, especially for the performance challenges that I've included here. Because she's a Texas girly, she makes sense in the country girl groups. She makes sense in the Rusical because that's somewhere that Ru has really enjoyed seeing her. She makes sense in the 8-ball because of her abilities to create and to tailor for her own body. Now we need to remove Denali from the brackets that she doesn't make sense in. I think that Denali, while she's been great in the purple group, I think she makes a whole lot more sense in the same way that Olivia does for a Rusical, doing a Rusical challenge. And obviously we saw her slay the country girl group challenge, so I would love to see her in that. And then we remove Daya from other areas where I think she makes more sense kind of in the middle of the season, being paired up with Georges. She's got more chemistry with her than she does with someone like Alyssa. I think their energy is awkward, and Daya is one of the first ones that I'm really thinking about her cohesiveness with the rest of the group, because I think that informs a lot of how she plays the game. Her social game, I think, is very different than some of these others, so having her with someone like Georges, who isn't great at playing the social game and is usually the second fiddle to someone else playing socially, I think the two of them would be able to help each other. So really she's here because I think she works well with the Rusical and the 8-ball, but also because I think she would have good synergy with Georges. Then we remove Deja from other brackets. I think Deja is one of those girlies who was not on the radar in her season, and she was not on the radar this season. So I think having her at the beginning of the season, front-loading her in, makes sense. Then we remove Carrie from other brackets. She's one of those girlies, much like Deja, that really is not on anybody's radar. So if she is going to get sort of steamrolled, let it be by the big dogs. Again, it will create more sympathy for her. And I don't think she was necessarily going to do well in any of these challenges, personally. So now we remove Tina from other extraneous brackets. I think she makes most sense smack dab in the middle. She's one of those queens that had a lot of expectations on her from rebranding, and I think having her kind of right in the middle of the season is a nice way to remove some of the fatigue that comes with Drag Race by this middle point. She is a good person to keep the television energy up by this middle part of the game. Then removing Acid Betty from other extraneous brackets. I think Betty makes the most sense right smack dab in the middle. And then we need to remove Cynthia. She's another one of those girlies, much like I think Deja, much like Carrie, is not really on anybody's radar. She's someone who I think a lot of people have been sort of back and forth on, but she's got fantastic energy. So having her be at the tail end of the season, I think is a good spot for her. Then Nicole, who I think makes the most sense in the middle where the country girl group is, because then she can shine at least a little bit, certainly more than she could have in a rap roast. She was never going to do well in any of the design challenges, and the performance ones I think she was hit and miss on, but she was quite fun in Star Booty, the rebooty, and I would like to see her in that again. Then we remove Lydia from other brackets. I think just giving Lydia a little more time off of her season, even if it was just like 5 more days, makes tons of sense, so then she can get her package together just a little bit tighter. It was already really good, but let's just see it be fine-tuned a little more. I would love to see her in that rock and roll challenge. I think it makes sense for her. And then I think that she would be a great addition to that makeover challenge. She's someone who's got a strong brand identity, and I think she would rival Irene in that challenge. Then we remove Phoenix. I think she makes the most sense in the country girl groups. I don't think she was ever going to do well anywhere else. Now that we've whittled everyone down for who makes sense in which bracket, now we have to do math to create 6 queens in each bracket. So here's where the reshuffle comes in, and who I think makes most sense cohesively. For Orange Group, Bosco and Aja, powerful trans women, opening up the bracket with great energy. Mistress and Ginger, the very clear pushes. They're going to make it all the way to the end no matter what, so let's just get it out of the way early. Carrie and Deja were never really on the radar, but I think the two of them have good energy, or would, together, and would be fun to see. And so that basically leaves either Aja or Bosco as that third queen to go through. With the way that Carrie and Deja played the game, they've tried to be very judicial with it. I think Bosco and Aja were playing a little more competitively, so it would be interesting to see how those four would tackle getting around Ginger and Mistress, and who would emerge as that third queen to go to the next round with them. For Pink Group, I think because the theme of that first episode is country divas, I want some of these Southern girlies like Phoenix, Nicole, Georges. I think they make sense in that challenge. Tina and Daya, I think, have a lot of potential for episode 2 and 3 of this bracket, even if they were not really on the radar for country girl groups, which leaves us with 3 queens of this bracket who I haven't decided where I want to put them yet, and who I want to keep in pink bracket and who I want to scoot over to purple. That's Denali, Acid, and Olivia. Who is going to make the most sense here? But before we do that, let's get into purple group. I think the queens who make the most sense in this bracket are the queens that people have been anticipating. That's Irene. People have been excited to see queens like Denali and Acid for a long time, so they kind of make sense at the end as well. I think to end this, we need people that have great energy, who can keep the vibe up as we are starting to really get into the fatigue portion of this season, as we're starting to get exhausted and just are ready for it to be over. I think Lydia's got great energy. I think Cuckoo's got great energy. So cohesively, my final breakdown is, I think that while Denali is someone who a lot of people have been waiting for, I don't want to keep her till the very end. I want her to be right smack dab in the middle, have a lot of energy circulating around her. Plus, I think she makes the most sense in these kinds of challenges. Olivia doesn't really make sense in rock or improv, but she was very clearly not on the vision board to go to the next bracket. I think being paired with other queens who weren't really on the vision board either, like Alyssa, like Cuckoo, like Acid, makes her be less steamrolled than she would have been by specifically Denali, who a lot of people have been looking forward to seeing, and Georges, who already is the producer favorite. And I think Daya, who plays the game very well. If Olivia was in that middle bracket, I don't think that she would have ever stood out, except maybe in the Rusical. I don't think her energy would necessarily be good with any of those queens. And Olivia being in a group of people who are not really on the producer radar, I think is a little more fair and kind to her trajectory, since no one was really being looked at like, oh yeah, that's the one that is going to get favored. Lydia would make sense literally nowhere because she doesn't know any of these queens. They don't know her, so she's just establishing herself as a player. Plus, it gives her a little more time off of her season to get ready. Alyssa and Cuckoo were not on the vision board to go to the finale at all, I think, but the two of them work well together, and I think Acid and Cynthia clearly need to be together. They are very close, they're good friends, their alignment would be fun to see in any version of reality, and I think Acid has said that she would not have done this season if Cynthia was not there. So here's my expected placements for who I think would fall where. I think that in the roast remix, we would see Aja and Mistress in the top. It would get very clearly solidified that Mistress is an endgame player, that Aja's got potential. In Murder on the Dance Floor, I think it would be very clearly Bosco and Ginger. They're some of the best of this entire bracket in improv. And then for the character design challenge, I could see Mistress and Ginger working together and powering through that challenge in what I think would be a really interesting way. For the pink group, I would see obviously Georges and Denali doing well in the country girl groups. Georges is the performer. She's the push of the season. Denali was very unexpected in that. For 8-Ball, I think that Tina would knock it out of the park. Daya would be a surprise underdog player in that one. And I think for the Rusical, it would be Georges and Denali once again. And then for purple bracket, Irene dominates every category with Lydia right behind her. I think that Acid would be able to pull out something super interesting for that makeover challenge. Plus, if I remember correctly, Acid did not get to do a makeover challenge in season 8. I think she was cut right before that happened. So this would be a good opportunity for her to show what she's able to do. And so I think the lock-ins for each one of these brackets would be Mistress and Ginger. Again, if they're gonna go to the finale, let's just let it happen early. Let's let it happen right at the start. And then for that middle bracket, I think Georges was always a lock-in. Denali would be a surprise lock-in. And then for purple bracket, Irene dominated and clearly made her mark. And I think Lydia was someone who was just so good and was kind of all-stars ready sans her runway package in 17. So she would do quite well here. I think with this casting, it's less overt what the plan is. Anybody with eyeballs would know that Ginger, Georges, and Mistress were clearly going to go to the end. Putting the pushes at the beginning of the season gets all of that production stuff out of the way. I think what happened, unfortunately, in the original season is that a lot of queens that were not really on the radar were put into Orange Group, showed what they can do, and set up an interesting energy for us as viewers to think, oh my God, this All Stars is going to be different. It's going to avoid all of the production stuff that's happened before. We saw Bosco get a little bit of a push, but it wasn't too chaotically overt. And then we get into Pink Group, where it is so clear that 0.5 distribution of win was, I think, really what made a lot of people think, oh, this is not what we thought it was going to be from Orange Group. And then Purple Bracket came in like a wrecking ball, and everyone realized, oh, it's the same Drag Race. It just started different. And I think with some of these pairings, they make a lot more sense. If these were the pairings, I think this would make for a much more dynamic and interesting season. But in any case, thank you so much for watching this longer video. Thank you for tuning in, and this season of All Stars is almost over. Thank you for watching, and I will see y'all on the flip.